caves are dark, tight, silent. They hide beauty and danger. For some, stepping inside is the start of an adventure. For others, it's the start of a nightmare. These are real stories of people who went in and faced the unthinkable. Some escaped, some didn't. And every single one will leave you wondering, would you have made it out? A tourist ignored the warning signs and trapped over 20 people in the dark. The Cango Caves are famous for their amazing rock shapes and winding tunnels, but deep inside is a passage called the Tunnel of Love that's so small you have to crawl on your stomach. A woman on a tour thought she could make it through, even though the guides warned her it was extra tight. She squeezed in, inch by inch, until she felt the walls pressing hard against her sides. That's when she realized she couldn't move forward or backward. It wasn't just her in trouble. Behind her were 22 other people trapped in the cave. They couldn't go forward because she was blocking the way, and the only exit was behind her. The air was cold and damp. People started to get hungry and thirsty. One man needed insulin for his diabetes, so rescuers had to pass it through the narrow space. Everyone had to sit in the darkness for hours, listening to the echoes of voices bouncing off the cave walls. After nearly 11 hours, rescuers used slippery paraffin oil to coat her body. Slowly, with a lot of careful pulling, they managed to free her. The group finally stepped into the fresh air, blinking against the sunlight. No one was badly hurt, but everyone walked away with a story they'd never forget, and maybe a new fear of small spaces. He thought it was just a shortcut until the cave demanded everything, even his clothes. Jacob Sanders was just 15 years old when he decided to explore a cave near his home. At first, the opening looked big enough to crawl through. He wriggled forward on his hands and knees, his flashlight beam bouncing off the wet rock walls. But as the tunnel got smaller, his clothes started to catch on sharp rock edges. The more he moved, the more stuck he became. His hoodie twisted around his arms and his pants snagged on the stone. The air felt heavy and the space was so tight he could barely turn his head. Finally, Jacob realized the only way out was to take his clothes off. He wriggled out of his hoodie, then unbuckled his belt and slid out of his pants until he was just in his underwear. Scraped and dusty, Jacob backed up slowly until he could stand again. The cool outside air felt like freedom. He was embarrassed, sure, but also relieved. The cave had taught him a lesson he wouldn't forget. Small spaces can be a lot more dangerous than they look. His homemade rope was the only way down, and it wasn't coming back up. In California, a 16-year-old boy decided to explore an abandoned mine. The entrance was high up, so he tied a regular rope to a sturdy rock and lowered himself down. It wasn't climbing rope, it was the kind you might use to tie something to your car. At first, it held his weight just fine. But once he reached the bottom, the rope suddenly snapped with a loud pop. The boy was left standing in the dark, 50 feet below the surface, surrounded by dripping walls and old wooden beams from the mine. He shouted for help, but no one answered right away. The air felt cooler down there, and every sound seemed to echo forever. Eventually, someone outside heard his voice and called 911. Firefighters arrived with real climbing gear and set up a pulley system to lift him to safety. As soon as he stepped onto solid ground again, he realized how lucky he'd been. If no one had heard him, he might have been down there all night or longer. Lost underwater, he found air, but that was only the first battle. A diver in China was exploring an underwater cave when he lost his way. He searched for the exit, but the water was murky and the tunnels twisted in every direction. Out of air, he swam upward into a small pocket of air trapped under the rock. He could breathe, but he was still nearly 30 feet under the water. For 5 long days, he stayed in that tiny space. The air was damp and smelled of stone. Water dripped from the cave ceiling into the pool below. He caught fish with his hands and ate them raw to stay alive. Every time he dove down to search for a way out, the cold water made his body ache. On the 5th day, rescuers finally reached him. They brought diving masks and guided him out through the dark water. When he surfaced, he was weak, shivering, and starving. The first thing he asked for wasn't a hot meal. It was a cigarette. A single falling rock sparked one of the largest cave rescues in history. In 2014, a man named Johann Westhauser was exploring the Riesending Cave in Germany. one of the deepest in the world. At more than 3,200 feet underground, the tunnels twisted and dropped in all directions. Then, disaster struck. A rock fell and hit him hard on the head. He couldn't climb out on his own. The rescue was huge. Teams from 5 countries came to help. They had to crawl through tiny tunnels, climb steep drops, and set up ropes in wet, slippery passages. The deeper they went, the colder and darker it became. Every step was slow and careful because if anyone got hurt, they'd be stuck too. After 11 days of work, they finally brought Johan to the surface. A helicopter carried him to the hospital. The rescue became famous as one of the hardest ever attempted, showing just how dangerous and exhausting deep cave rescues can be. One man's entrapment turned into the most famous cave story America had ever seen. In 1917, Floyd Collins was exploring Crystal Cave in Kentucky when disaster struck. While squeezing through a narrow tunnel, a rock fell and pinned his ankle. He couldn't move, and the tunnel was too tight for him to sit up. News spread fast. Soon, reporters and crowds gathered outside the cave. People camped there, cooked food and sold souvenirs, all while Floyd lay trapped in the cold dark. His voice carried up the tunnel, and rescuers tried to dig him out. The cave's walls were damp and crumbling, making every attempt dangerous. For 17 days, they worked to reach him. Sadly, the cave collapsed before they could get him out, and Floyd died underground. His story became one of the most famous cave accidents in American history, a mix of adventure, danger, and heartbreak. Now, you've already heard of the Nutty Putty incident, but here's one you probably haven't heard. 2 friends went exploring Nutty Putty Cave, a place known for its twisting, narrow passages. They crawled and squeezed through tight spaces, their flashlights casting shadows on the damp walls. But then they took a wrong turn and ended up in a tunnel, barely big enough to move in. The walls pressed against their sides, and no matter how they turned, they couldn't move forward or back. For 15 hours, they sat in the cold darkness, talking to keep their minds off the fear. Rescuers brought lights and tools, carefully working to free them without causing a collapse. Finally, they were pulled out, dusty and tired, but safe. They had only small cuts and bruises, but the memory of being trapped in that tiny space stayed with them for life. Next time you think about exploring caves, remember these stories. Be careful, listen to warnings, and always go with someone who knows what they're doing. Because caves hold many secrets. Some beautiful, some dangerous, and the best stories come from those who make it safely back out. As always, thanks for watching, subscribe to the channel and drop a like below for more.